Jakia, please unmute your microphone. Okay, I believe our reporter Jakia is facing some problem. Okay, let us start the session. I see that Professor Dr. Akhtar Hussein, the session chair, is already here, and also the keynote speaker, Professor Hussein Abbas, IEEE Fellow from University of New South Wales, Australia. He is also here, but unfortunately, few minutes back, he informed us that he will not be able to present because of poor internet connectivity. But fortunately, what he has done, he has sent us his video recording. So may I now request Professor Syed Akhtar Hussain to introduce our keynote speaker, and then the video will be presented, and in the question answering session, our keynote speaker will be available to answer the question. Thank you very much. Okay, please start, please. May I request Professor Akhtar to start his reading his biography and introduce Professor Hussein Abbas. Professor Akhtar, can you hear me?
Very good afternoon. But very good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Professor Akhtar, you have two accounts, so that's why it echo comes. So just use the one where your video is available. So please.
Professor Akhtar, can you hear me?
I can hear now.
I believe.
Let me just close and the session.
Yes.
Now. Better.
Yes, please. Professor Akhtar, have you been able to sort it out?
Yeah, a very good afternoon, and respected session moderators, my respected colleague, the Honorable Pro-Vice Chancellor, and the chair of the session, and distinguished speakers, the learned gathering. A very, very good afternoon and assalamu alaikum. It is a great pleasure to really You invited me in this session to chair a session, and an amazing personality. I was looking forward to see him, Professor Hussein AbbassI. I'm just reading a short bio of him. Uh, this title of this talk actually talks about his passion. It's tenets of trust and transparency in human, swarm teaming, and especially Professor Hussein Abbas is a professor at the University of New South Wales, Canberra, Australia, and he actually has a very renowned career. He's the founding editor-in-chief of the IEEE Transactions on Artificial Intelligence. He's an associate editor of the IEEE Transaction on Neural Networks and Learning Systems, IEEE Transactions on Evolutionary Computing, IEEE Transactions on Cognitive and Developmental Systems, IEEE Transactions on Cybernetics, ACM Computing Survey, and 4 other journals. He was the Vice President of Technical Activities from the period of 2016 till 2019 for the IEEE Computational Intelligence Society. Professor Abbas is a Fellow of the IEEE, Fellow of Australian Computer Society, and is a Fellow of the Operational Research Society. He is a Fellow of the Institute of Managers and Leaders Australia and New Zealand. He has published over 300 papers in journals and conferences, and he authored 4 books in the area of intelligence and computational intelligence. His current research contribution to trusted human swarm teaming with an aim to design next generation trusted and distributed artificial intelligence systems that seamlessly integrate human and machines. Nevertheless, I just want to mention one more point is that he is a distinguished fellow whose Yardis number is 4, and there are very few scientists in the world who has a very low Yardis number. And I was very amazed to read about his personal website. I wanted to look forward to see him in person on this virtual platform, but nevertheless, I will request the session moderator to put up the video of his talk and let us enjoy this talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. May I now request Mohammed Iqbal Pritam, sir, to share the video now.
Yes, sir, we are doing it.
Topic in artificial intelligence. You would know that explainable artificial intelligence is on a very high demand. Artificial intelligence in general is a very hot area because almost every aspect of our life, in industry, in government organization, in schools, in hospitals, every aspect of our life today has been somehow digitized, and artificial intelligence is offering us significant amount of opportunities to improve human life. But black box artificial intelligence is not helpful for human because human can't understand them. So the demand is quite high on how to design an AI that can explain what it's doing to the human, that's not giving human surprises, that is interpretable so that it can speak in a language that the human can understand. So this is the context of today, but I'm not talking about a classic AI. I am talking about a more powerful type of artificial intelligence that is known as distributed artificial intelligence. So human swarm teaming is our context. Well, I have one or more humans interacting with distributed cognitive agents, and we'll be looking at these three tenets of trust and transparency for human swarm teaming. So let us begin. My talk today will be structured in three phases. In the first phase, I'll talk to you about human swarm teaming. I'll explain swarm intelligence. I'll explain why swarm guidance is a difficult problem. Then I will introduce you to human swarm teaming. Then after that, in the second phase, I will talk to you about the three tenets for transparency: interpretability, explainability, and predictability. Then after that, I will conclude in the third phase with some of the most challenging problems that we would like to solve in this area. I will talk to you about the future research directions. Then I will conclude my talk with three take-home messages that I hope that you will take out of my talk as the main points that I'm trying to make today. So let us begin. I will start with human swarm teaming and introducing swarm intelligence. The swarm intelligence is a very old topic in artificial intelligence. It's about distributed agents, about agents that act almost independently, but they exhibit a complex behavior by interacting together. So while these are very simple agents, the behavior that they produce is much more complex than what any of them can do individually. The classic example of a swarm intelligence is social insects. So Punapu, Dorigo, and the Rolos in 1999, they had one of the oldest, and it was actually the first book that discussed this topic at depth. But when they talked about swarm intelligence, they mainly focused on social insects. They identified that there are approximately 10 to the power 8 living insects on Earth, and 2% of them are social. And only these social insects are the insects that are covered under swarm intelligence, because that is almost one of the main conditions, that the agents need to exist in a society and they need to be social agents. What this means is they need to have tendency to be together. So social insects are all ants, all termites, some bees and some wasps. Approximately 9,000 species of, there are 9,000 species of ants. And a colony size can reach 1 million ants. A queen may live for more than 20 years. So when you have a colony which exists of 1 million ants, that is a significant size. And it is really fascinating to ask ourselves, how can these ants with very simple behavior produce complex patterns like that we see that looks like a human designed castle of some sort? So let us move away from social insects to another type of swarm intelligence. Schooling, fish schooling, when we look at fish and how they swim together, the patterns they construct through their interaction. Again, simple agents with complex behavior. We look at birds in the sky, and when we look at birds in the sky, we again see this type of complex behavior that's emerging from very simple agents. Then I have at the bottom of the slide another type of complexity, another type of swarm behavior with gray fox. Now, gray fox is quite different from the ants, from the fish, from the birds in the sky, in the way they organize themselves. So they organize themselves in some sort of social hierarchy, where we have 4 types of foxes. The alpha, and the alpha is pretty much the leaders of the pack. They are the hunters. They are specialized in hunting. They choose sleeping locations. They dictate decisions to the swarm. Those second in line is the betas foxes. So betas, they support the alphas. They give them advice pretty much. They ensure that the pack is disciplined. Then the third in line is the deltas. And the delta foxes respond to alpha and beta. And the main role for the deltas is to guard, to scout, to take care of the children and the elders in the herd. And the last is the omega. So the omega is almost like the lowest category in the fox herd. They eat last. The main role of the omega would be secondary in nature, such as babysitting. So we could see differences in this swarm. We could see differences between ants, fish, birds in the sky, gray foxes. But there's something common in everything that I covered up to now, that this swarm are formed of almost homogeneous agents. Sometimes they have social hierarchy, but each agent in this swarm continue to be an agent in the swarm. Surprisingly, that's not always the case in nature. In 2009, there was an article in the Discovery magazine about a particular type of insects called the desert locusts. So the desert locust has a very interesting characteristic. These type of insects, they have a chemical in their body called the serotonin, and this chemical almost get activated when these insects realize that there's enough food in the environment. So when there isn't enough food, this chemical does not get activated. And what these insects, they do, they become solitary. They live on their own. So this is this green insect here. This green color indicate that this locust is simply a solitary mode. It's living by itself. But as soon as the amount of food in the environment increases, the amount of serotonin starts propagating in the body, and suddenly this activates 500 genes. 500 genes get switched on. And within 2 hours of transformation, these insects change color and they also change behavior. They move away from being solitary insects to become extremely sociable. And now they end up with masses of these insects start living together. So it seems that even in nature, swarming is not an either-or problem. An insect could become solitary and could change its behavior to become a swarm. What's fascinating about that is it depends on the environment. It is not the insect decision to switch. It is the environmental condition which causes the insect to switch. So let us now try to define what is swarm intelligence, and I will follow a very systematic way to define it for you today. So I will just go to the dictionary. when I look at the word swarm, and we look at the dictionary, we find this word swarm as a noun, and that's one of the definitions: a large number of animate or inanimate things massed together and usually in motion. If it's a verb, the definition is to move or assemble in a crowd. You could see the commonality in the definition of a swarm. It's about being in large numbers, mass, and it's about movement. It's about being in motion. The second aspect of a swarm intelligence is the word intelligence. And the way that I like to define intelligence is to define it as the automation of cognitive functions. So intelligence is really about cognition, about these cognitive functions that we have in our brain. It's about perception, comprehension, projection. These are the three components of situation awareness as being defined by Emsley. It's about learning, understanding, planning, deciding, all pretty much cognitive function that we have on our brain. Intelligence is about creating and designing these cognitive functions and understanding how they work and how they interact together to create what we call an intelligent agent, an agent that can sense and decide and act in the environment, can anticipate actions of other agents in the environment, can plan ahead, can adapt its behavior, can learn, and so on. So when we put these two together in swarm intelligence, we can see that we have three building blocks for swarm intelligence: mass, motion, and cognition. So now I can give you my definition of a swarm intelligence. It is cognitive mass in motion. A cognitive mass in motion is a swarm. And I can simplify that in a more concise definition. Because obviously having so many agents in motion is not really enough to make them a swarm because they can collide with each other. So the key is that they need to synchronize their action so that they can move in masses without colliding, without interfering with each other. So I can define now the swarm intelligence to you as it is about cognitive synchronization. So let me now move from swarm intelligence into swarm robotics. And the definition is the same. The swarm robotics, it's about distributed cognitive agents that synchronize action. You could see the agents here. The agents are these red dots and the green dots. We have two types of agents. The red dots, they move relative to each other. The green dot, every green dots around a red dot, they move relative to the red dot. What is amazing about this system that you see in front of you is that none of these agents actually communicate with each other. The reason we get this organized or self-organized behavior is because of the ability to synchronize. And they can synchronize without necessarily communicating. So that is the advantage of swarm robotics, our ability to create masses of agents that can act and solve problems through synchronization. So why do we need swarms? Obviously, we have so many socioeconomic applications for swarms. One in Australia, which is one of the applications that I'm working on, is the fact that we have very huge farms. And a single UAV is not really sufficient to cover this space for lots of different reasons. So a swarm could actually help the farmer to do lots of things on this farm, from inspecting plants to herding sheep, for example, to inspecting weeds on the ground. Another application for swarm is when there are accidents in the ocean, when one of the ships leak petrol, for example. This type of leakages is extremely difficult to clean. And Swarm can offer lots of help here, because you can send this large number of underwater vehicle to clean this ocean. Another fantastic application which is emerging for Swarm is using nano robots for medicine. So swarm-based medicine, at the moment, people are looking at how to send these nano robots inside the human body so that, for example, to treat cancer. So you can send masses of these agents inside the human body through the blood stream. And when they reach and detect the cancer cells, they start treating the patient from this cancer. Another good use of swarm is that we know that one of the measures is actually the most frequent and most dangerous type of safety hazard in airlines is during takeoff and landing, that there are birds in the airport area. So when the flight starts taking off, these birds can enter into the engine, and this create fire for the engine and create a safety hazard. So some of the scientists in Caltech with collaborators from Asia, they designed this drone which can go and herd these birds. So these birds is really the swarm, and what the drone does, it actually comes and guides the birds away from the aircraft or from the airport. So how do we really implement this type of swarming in robotics? There are obviously many technical details into that, but I will talk about one of the most simplest models for swarming, and that is a Boyd model. And Boyd stands for birdoids, which means that they are agents that mimic the behavior of birds. Reynolds in 1987 came up with three simple rules for swarming. The first thing that he talked about is that this is a social phenomena. So this agent will tend to go to the local center of mass of its neighbor, because they need to cluster together. So that's what's known as cohesion. So this agent is attracted to this point. Second point is this agent needs to align its direction with its neighbor. That's called alignment. So the second force acting on this agent is this alignment force. The third force is that this agent needs to be able to avoid conflict with the local agents next to it. So it needs to, for this agent, it needs to go to the opposite direction. For this agent, it needs to go to that opposite direction. For this agent to avoid it, it needs to go back to that opposite direction. So that ends up with this direction, which is a fusion of these three force vectors, and this direction becomes the separation direction. Now, what this agent is doing at the moment is that it has three force vectors which is acting on it. One force vector, it's telling it goes this way, another it's telling it goes this way, and a third one to go that way. And what this agent needs to do is to decide on the fusion of these three force vectors to decide where it's heading. And if we look at this very simple rules, in implementation, you get to see what I am showing here on this screen. You get to see these type of patterns, which are simply emerging as if a group of birds are flocking together in that space. And you get to see them joining and splitting and so on. So that is what a basic model of a swarm intelligence will look like. Obviously, we have a problem here that when you look at this model is I can't really guide it anywhere. They are flying together as birds, but there's nothing other than these three simple rules that I explained that's guiding their behavior. So that is what makes the swarm guidance really difficult. How can I actually guide a large number of agents with minimum number of agents? Luckily, when we look at nature again, we find that there are models in nature which are doing that. And one of these models is sheepdogs. Sheepdogs go and collect a large number of sheep by following very simple rules. And again, Strombaum and others came up with very basic rules to get sheepdogs to collect the sheep. And it turned out that what Reynolds did with boids is extremely useful because that is the model being used by the sheep. They tend to cluster together, they avoid collision, and they tend to move in the same direction. So what shepherding is about is how to guide them. So what the sheepdog does, the sheepdog adds an extra force vector, a force vector which causes the sheep to go in the direction of the sheepdog. So if this sheepdog is moving in that direction, the sheep will start repulsing away from the sheepdog in the same direction. So it turns out that by using this sheepdog's idea, we could actually control a large number of cognitive agents. So let me now move away from the swarm guidance into the human swarm teaming problem. So the human swarm teaming, again, I have this large number of agents, which is what we call the swarm, like what we've seen in the previous slides. These agents we need to somehow communicate. So this is my infrastructure. Each of these vehicles could have a couple of dozens sensors on it, and there are communication networks that's helping them to communicate with external agents. In this particular case, the external agents are the humans. So these are the humans that are teaming with this swarm. And these humans themselves could be communicating with each other, and they are communicating with the swarm. In addition to that, these humans could actually take this to a different level of complexity, where in addition to having the ground vehicle, they could also be communicating with another swarm in the air. So when you start looking at a system like that, you start getting to see the complexity of this system. To be able to have a system like that, we need to have the three components of Industry 4. We need to have the physical infrastructure, not just these robots which are moving and the sensors on top of these robots. We may need to have communication infrastructure to support the communication between the robots and the human and among themselves. We need to have obviously the cyber layer, and that is the propagation of signals in this environment, the networking, the information security stuff, and so on. And we need to have the cognition. The cognition is really the AI, whether it is the artificial intelligence or the real intelligence. So the cognition of the human and the cognition of the AI that's driving the system together, they form the cognition of the system. And obviously, because we are talking here about the interaction between humans and AI, we need to have the computational environment to support them. So when we start looking at this problem, we discover that it's actually maybe the most challenging problem for industry for how we can do human swarm teaming efficiently. There are so many challenges that this problem raises. The physical cyber cognitive infrastructure, the organization of that, the design of that, problems with each of these layers. Digitization and computations, that's an environment where we have a significant amount of computation that's happening. And if you start thinking about each of these UAV in the sky or each of these vehicles on the ground, you potentially from Industry 4, you will start to be talking about edge computing. And indeed, most of these simple agents have extremely limited computational resources. There are so many challenges about safety and security. When we talk about swarm intelligence, we are talking about sometimes unpredictable behavior. So how we can actually maintain the safety of the system, the security of the communication infrastructure that I showed you in the previous slide. And obviously artificial intelligence. We are not talking about the classic type of AI here. We are talking about distributed artificial intelligence. Another challenge is social integration, the integration between the swarm and the human and that are interacting with the swarm. And we have huge challenges in terms of ethics, morality, accountability, and legality. How to make sure that this swarm is doing the right thing? How do we make sure that whatever it's doing is compliant with our ethical framework in our society, with human dignity, with morality, with even accountability? Who's going to be accountable for actions in this environment? And in addition to legal issues that has to be resolved. So human swarm teaming is faced with significant amount of challenges. So let me now, allow me now to move to our main challenge that I will cover in the second phase of this talk, which is trust and transparency. So let us look at transparency, and I will be talking about the interpretability, explainability, and predictability. For human swarm teaming to work efficiently, the swarm needs to be transparent to the human, and the human needs to be transparent to the swarm. But obviously, the question that we ask here is, what does this actually mean? What does it mean to be transparent? It turns out that this concept of transparency is possibly one of the most confusing topic in the literature. And when we start uncovering the details of that, we discover that the source of confusion is not just in transparency. It's actually because these three building blocks of transparency are extremely confusing in the literature as well: interpretability, explainability, and predictability. So let me first show you how these concepts are confusing. Let me then, after that, give you a formal definition to avoid this confusion. Then after that, I will give you an architecture, how we can put this together in a system that can support human swarm teaming. So when you look at the confusion in the literature, something like interpretability, you find many different definitions. Some people define it as the degree to which an observer can understand the cause of a decision. Now, that's extremely confusing because here we are talking about causality. If you think about interpretability as someone who is translating between from French to English, and if you understand English and you are listening to the English version of that, you can't really think about interpretability from the perspective of these causes, because you are not necessarily seeking a particular explanation of how things get translated. What you are seeking is to interpret what the other person is saying, and the translator job is to do this interpretation. Another confusing definition in the literature almost implied that interpretability is a form of prediction. So again, there is significant difference between prediction and interpretability. And the third definition defines systems are interpretable if their operations can be understood by a human. So it confuses interpretability with human understanding per se. And again, it confuses it with explanation. The same issue with explainability. Some people restrict explainability to causality. And when you do that, obviously, causality is a very strict type of explanation. Explainability goes beyond causality when you are asking someone to give you an argument or to explain something. Yeah, we are not always seeking the causes of that. We are just seeking a set of concepts that get organized to help us to understand the phenomena of interest. Some authors said that explainability is about the why question, but when I'm asking a question, how did you do that? I am really seeking an explanation as well. When I'm asking, what did you do? I'm still seeking an explanation. So limiting explainability to the why question is a severe limitation on explainability. Even when Rauba defined explainable AI, they said it's about developing machines with an enhanced understanding. So the fact is that the machine can understand, it does not make it really explainable, because the machine may be able to understand, but it is not communicating that understanding to other agents in the environment. And again, there are different forms of understanding other than what we would normally think about from a human perspective. The same when we go and look at predictability, we discover that there's again significant confusions. People equate predictability with anticipation, and people almost condition an agent that the agent needs to be consistent to be predictable. I could have a model of an agent that is not consistent, but because I have a model of that agent, I am able to predict its behavior perfectly fine. So consistency is not necessarily equal to predictability, or is not a necessary condition for predictability. We can have systems which are predictable without consistency. So where does this take us? We needed to come up with a high definition. We needed to go back to the roots of artificial intelligence to actually come up with definition that disambiguates these concepts. And we did in the paper, in our most recent paper on the topic, and we introduced this definition. We said that interpretability, it's actually dependent on the recipient. And what I am trying to do is that I am trying to take something from the agent, whether it is about the agent behavior, whether it is the algorithmic component, that is the logic the agent is using to produce a behavior, or the parameterization and the computation of this logic, or the state of the task or the mission that the agent is responsible for. And interpretability is a function that takes these three components and produce a knowledge set that a recipient can understand. So I am using what I know to make a statement for you to understand it. And when I am doing that, I am trying to speak in a language that you will be easily able to actually interpret it. You will be easily able to integrate it with your own knowledge set. So because of that, interpretability is a function of the recipient. Explainability is not a function of the recipient. Explainability is a process inside an agent that allows the agent to produce a coherent sequence of statements that connect an initial state to a target state. So if I come and I ask you for an explanation for omega, explainability is about the generation of these logical statements that at the end lead me to understand omega, lead me to omega. Now, these logical statements are not just causes and effect. They could be just a coherent way to connect the input and the output. Like in argumentation theory, when I'm giving you an argument, I'm not really giving you a cause for what you see. I am giving you an argument for what you see. That is a very weak form of explanation and causality. So with an argument, almost counterfactual causality is not a consistent concept with the argument. Or alternatively, I could simply just give you a mapping from the sensorial inputs to the actions of the agent. Predictability is an estimation of the next state of a mission given previously observed mission states by an agent. So again, I am talking here about the ability of the agent to estimate the next state of the mission. Now, it does not require that other agents in the environment have to be consistent. The agent could use its internal knowledge about the system to estimate the next state, even though that if you observe the other agents in the environment, none of them is consistent. So when we start putting that into a framework to go away from the level of just defining the concept into an architecture, what we get to see here is a service-oriented architecture which explains how this human is going to interact with this swarm and how we provide in the design of our computational model the services which allow for the interpretability module. We need to have language services so that if I'm speaking, if I need to translate to French, I translate to French. If I need to translate to Italian, I translate to Italian. So I need to have language services. I need to have fusion services, which allows the agent to take multiple pieces of information to put them together before the interpretation occurs. And I need to have a trust service. I need to have models of trust, and I need to be able to calibrate these models against these agents. So that's interpretability, the communication of language between these two agents. But what is these agents are communicating? They require explanation. So explanation is the inference services, which is sitting at the back end here, that if this agent is trying to explain something, it needs to come up with an internal explanation that will then be interpreted to the external agents in a language that they can understand. And it needs to have the predictability module, which is simply about contextual awareness and having theory of mind. That is the ability of the agent to construct models of external agents it's interacting with. And to be able to do that, obviously we need to have our logic, the agent logic, the ability of the agent to do planning, to do control and guidance and so on. So that is the internal agent logic that explainability and predictability is acting on top of it. And the way this agent is communicating to the external environment in a language that other agents understand is through the interpretability module. So let me now conclude my talk, and I will be concluding it with future research directions. So the first future research direction is some of the work we are doing at the moment, which is about apprenticeship bootstrapping. When we're dealing with humans are not necessarily all experts, and apprenticeship bootstrapping is based on apprenticeship learning. So we came up with this apprenticeship bootstrapping concept, and that is the ability to learn more complex phenomena by building models from agents that are less complex. And what we could see here is this idea of sheepdog that's guiding this ground vehicle. So this UAV has learned how to take off and guide this vehicle using this concept of apprenticeship bootstrapping. There are so much that we can do in this domain, and I would invite anyone who's interested to look at this paper to see some of the future work. Again, safety net for AI, we talked about the swarm, and we said that we could end up with behaviors which are quite dangerous. So how to put a safety net around the swarm. Again, safety nets is an evolving concept with significant challenges. How you can secure your industry for agents, these mobile agents, using the safety net concept. Then we go to the real world. What you see here is a UAV approaching the sheep, trying to collect them. And when we start taking this to the real world, we need to be able to handle uncertainty. There are so much in that environment. If you look at the reaction of the sheep, for example, suddenly they will start running. And this type of behavior, we need to be able to handle the uncertainty in the environment, when the information to these and so on. And last but not least, security of the swarm is a very hot topic. So what's going to happen if one of the swarm, for example, is spoofed? So looking at the robustness of the swarm and the security of the swarm is one of the hot topics. So let me please now conclude with three take-home messages. My first take-home message is human swarm teaming is possibly the most challenging industry for complex systems of systems. I invite you to look at human swarm teaming. If you are working in Industry 4, there are so many challenges that needs people and good resources to address. Trust and transparency requires interpretability, explainability, and predictability. And last but not least, we can design trustworthy, transparent artificial intelligence systems. There are ways of doing that, but also there are challenges. And by making the system transparent, using the three tenets that I talked about today, is a very good step toward that. And with that, I would like to thank you for inviting me today and for listening to me. These are the references that I have for my talk. And this is our new book that will be coming in early January 2021. And if you would like to learn about transparency, interpretability, and predictability, this book is available online. This paper is available online, and I invite you to have a look at it. Thank you so much once more, and I really hope that I would have been with you today, but COVID-19 is challenging for all of us. So I wish you a very successful conference.
Thank you for sharing this very lovely presentation. Respected audience, I'm sure you have tons of questions, so do I. But Professor Hussein Abbas' video opened up with lots of interesting upcoming research challenges as well. So maybe we can have a communication via email with Professor Hussein Abbas on the issues that you may have in terms of research, and an excellent presentation. I was amazed to see the entire swarm teaming simulation that he could produce, and he's a great speaker of the time. Thank you for your patience hearing.
Professor Abbas is here. So,
May
Professor Akhtar,
I? Yeah, please, please.
Professor Abbas is here, so he can answer our queries or
Oh,
questions.
Professor AbbassI, you are welcome. Can you listen to us? Is that internet is okay?
Yes, I do. Are you able to listen to
Wonderful.
me? My apology, my video today. I am actually just starting my holiday, so my connection is quite bad. But hopefully you can hear what I'm saying.
Video was good, yeah.
I wanted to thank you first of all to join us in this great conference to make such a wonderful deliberation. But the most important thing that amazed me is your earliest number 4, and I was actually reading your entire portfolio this morning, you know, and I was amazed to see that there are very few artists number 4 in this world, and you are one of them. Yeah. So we, on behalf of the entire conference, mathematician of the time and maybe of the century, or maybe in the world, one of the most ever born genius, whose direct direct interaction with the Paul Yerdis is number 1. Paul Yerdis himself is 0, and the network has grown up to 200. I know the Paul Yerdis number for quite some time back, but I'm very happy that I met a great speaker, today's speaker, who has Paul Yerdis number 4. Amazing. So it's on behalf of me, my heartfelt thanks. May I open up the floor for the questions, please? Like for Professor Hussein Abbas is with us.
So may I
Please.
ask? So,
Professor Ahad, please, welcome,
yeah.
welcome.
Thank you, Abbas, for your excellent philosophical aspects of intelligence, especially which is important for explainable AI. So just may you give some information or your concept that when you consider animals, ants or wasps, we know that we don't know much about their differences in opinion, even in a team. But with a human being, we have varied thinking and cognition, and conceptualization of anything is sometimes very difficult when in decision making and transferring knowledge as well. So in these regards, in terms of interpretability and safety, and of course the reliability of AI for different kinds of more trustworthy applications, what goal we need to consider or what directions we need to move further? Can you just give some more on that? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ahad. And I really, I was really wishing to be with you today in Boston to discuss that. So thank you for a good question. There are many goals when we talk about transparency. One of the goals is to generate what we call mutual understanding, for the AI to be able to collaborate with a human. Both the human and the AI needs to have this shared understanding and mutual understanding. So that in itself is a huge challenge in artificial intelligence, because normally we expect that the AI is explaining the concept to the human, and most people would stop at getting an AI to explain to the human. But as a matter of fact, the human also need to be able to explain to the AI in a language that the AI can understand. Otherwise, the AI will not be able to collaborate with the human in an intelligent way. So this type of mutual understanding is an extremely challenging issue in the distributed artificial intelligence and even in the classic artificial intelligence literature. There are obviously aspects of language. So what language the AI and the human will be using in the communication, and there are challenges with the level of computations when we are talking as humans to each other. We are normally quite fast in explaining to each other the concepts. For AI to be able to interact with human with that speed, normally we will be talking about significant amount of computation. So how we could rely on things like cloud computing, and how we can design efficient communication algorithms between the human and the AI that are quite reliable and fast is another aim that we have with lots of open questions in the AI literature.
Professor Hussein Abbas needs another hours of
Thank you.
lecture on the same topic. And Professor Atik asked a very critical question. I do understand, but can we have one or two more questions from the very learned gathering?
There is a raise hand. So I unmute her. Okay, Sharmin Alam.
I may have one last question actually, not now. Questions, please. Professor Hussein Abbas, just to ask you a very interesting question that came in my mind while I was watching your simulation on the concept of the trust. How do you make it simple? Is there any way you can think of reducing the complexity? I mean, that's a very weird question, but it came in my mind that maybe in the future we may have a lot of complexity unnecessarily created because of our own interpretations. If I'm wrong, please correct me.
Actually, that's an extremely interesting question, Professor Said, and that's absolutely what we are trying to do. The complexity is normally a function of multiple things. So obviously, it depends on the complexity of the problem at hand. So if I have a simple problem, I don't need to complicate things for it. But another aspect which is correlated with complexity is the amount of risk and significance in the decision. Think about it. Think about it like that. If you think about a professional doctor in a hospital making decision about the life or otherwise of a patient, that type of decision is extremely critical, and it will require higher level of complexity than if I am looking at, for example, decisions in computer games. They could be complicated decisions, but the amount of risk in this decision is very low. So the complexity needs to scale based on the criticality of the decision and the significance of the problem that we are dealing with. If it is a serious problem, we need to take it seriously. If it is simplified problem, we could do with very simple way of solving it.
Thank you so much for highlighting on this topic. Do we have any more questions, or if not, then I will back to my very respected session moderator, the chair of the conference.
Thank you very much,
Yeah.
Professor Syed Akhtar Hussain sir, for chairing this session. And thank you very much, Professor Hussein Abbas, for making your time, even in the difficult situation that you are passing, and our respected faculty members, audience, for joining this long session. We are a bit delayed. I don't want to make any other further question, but I believe this discussion association helped us a lot to make a new dimension of the networking, and we'll keep in touch in future days for any other discussion and collaboration and exchange of ideas and thoughts in future days. Thank you very much. May I now request our rapporteur to show the certificate, share the certificate. Well, it's a great pleasure to have amongst us Professor Hussein Abbas.
A round of applause to our speaker. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. Continue your journey of success.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real honor to be with you today.
Thank you, Professor. We will share this e-certificate to you soon, inshallah. Next, please. May I now confer this certificate of appreciation?
Highly
It is proudly presented to Professor Dr. Syed Akhtar Hussein sir for sharing this
so
keynote
much for
session.
making me part of it. I'm very happy to
Thank
meet
you.
Professor Ahad after a long time. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. God bless.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. With this short note, I'm
Yeah,
concluding this
so much.
session.
And parallel sessions are going on.